Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice college basketball slate for you. 9 games here. We'll get into the injuries as we go from each team. But before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Make your comments below with your favorite picks today, and yeah, I'll shout you out in the next video if you have a good one. So before I get started, I hope everybody's doing good in college basketball so far this season. It does take a little time to get some data to give us some good opportunity, but now we've got some good data and we've been absolutely killing it the last couple of days. So we're going to try to continue that spread here. So let's go and get into this slate here. So we're going to start with this Wisconsin Providence game. Now this game has currently it's a PK on DraftKings Sportsbook and 145 points total. All the games today are within 141 and 147, except for 2 games, the Syracuse game and the Creighton game. With that said, all these games are relatively tight, so it should be a really good slate for DFS. Pretty high scoring as well. So for this Wisconsin Providence game, we have a couple players from each team to actually take a look at. So this is 2 teams that are kind of stackable. Tight games like this that have some pretty good scoring tend to be good types of games to find players from. And I felt like the value on Providence was pretty good, and the Wisconsin was kind of borderline. So let's go through Wisconsin first here. So for Wisconsin, we have 3 guys in Hepburn, Store, and Crowell to look at. Let me get all of this here. So Crowell, Hepburn, and Store. Now Crowell is the most expensive one. He's been pretty solid so far this season, where he's getting rebounds, assists, and some points, and so that's giving him some upside. His price is pretty good still. Obviously, he does have a little lower floor than I like. He was very borderline. I feel like Wisconsin was the most borderline team when it comes to use or not use, but I do think that they have a pretty good edge for these 3 guys. Store also in play, though his price is just slightly higher than I'd really like it to be. And then when we look at Hepburn, he's got a tough matchup here, but he's been playing pretty decent so far in the first 2 games. And I think this game will be a little bit easier than the Tennessee game for him, and he should be able to get a few more assists in this one than he did in the Tennessee game. So I think that does give him a little bit of edge, but I don't love Wisconsin, so they're kind of contrarian today. Looking at Providence, though, we have 4 guys I do like decently here. One of these guys being Carter for Providence. He's played very well so far. Looks like a really great price for this game as well. Obviously, the matchups have been a little bit easier, but he's got some nice upside here and is definitely in play. Looking at Pierre, his price is just a little bit too cheap here, as he does have some good upside here. Now, I will say that he does have a low floor, especially due to the fact that he's played easier matchups the first 2 games, but his price is still pretty good, and so he's definitely a good, decent play on the slate. And then we'll look at Adoro for Providence here. Now, he's had 2 really solid games as well. His price is a little high, but he's definitely in play on the slate and can have a really solid game. And then Gaines, looking for Providence, also kind of a good value play. A little bit risky, but does have some upside here as well. He might be the safest value play on this in this game from that perspective, just being $4,600. But I do think all of those guys have some upside. With that said, I think overall that game is definitely a game you can target, but they're not the best team to target on the slate. But they definitely have some utility. Looking at the Duke Michigan State game here, we do have one injury to look at for Michigan State, and that's Kohler. He is still out, and so as long as he's out, then that's going to give some upside to a few other guys. But we're going to start with Duke's options today, as that's really the only guys that I'm going to target from this game. One of them being Filipowski for Duke, the big guy. He's had 2 dominant games to start, including a good game against Arizona. I look for him to continue this domination and have close to double-double potential every game out. Even though he didn't get a double-double in either of the first 2 games, he scored enough fantasy points that he's definitely capable on the slate. We're also going to look at Mitchell for Duke, who has only played in 1 game, but he played pretty solid. I look for him to continue to get better as the season goes, so I think his price coming down coincide with a good matchup here against Michigan State, where he should have some upside, and so that gives him some opportunity here. I felt like the other players on Duke are a little bit pricey, so not really worth taking too strong a look at. And then Michigan State has just not played well to start. I kind of think Duke might end up blowing this game out, so they're pretty avoidable on the slate. But Hoggard does have some utility if you think he can get going in this one, which he hasn't yet been able to do. So it's also one of the lower scoring games on the slate, but it is a pretty tight spread. Looking at the next game here, we're going to look at Colgate and Syracuse. Now, this game actually is one of the higher scoring games on the slate at 157 points. And there's only one game that's in the same vicinity, and that's the Creighton game, and that's a little bit wider margin game. So obviously, this game looks like it would be an interesting game to pull some players from, and it definitely is, especially if we're going to look at Syracuse first here. So we have three guys in Mintz, Starling, and Taylor that we do like here. Mintz being a decent option, even though he's very expensive here. He is definitely in play here, though he is a must play because of the price. But with the upside of the speed of this game, he should have some utility here. And he's also hitting some threes, which is giving him a little bit of bonus as well. And so that gives him some potential on the slate. He's also getting a good number of assists and rebounds. Starling, meanwhile, also draws some really good opportunity here at a pretty good price. I was a little surprised he was this cheap, as he's played pretty well in the first two games. Again, the matchups do matter here, but this is not a super tough matchup for Syracuse either, and I expect him to have a similar outing for the first two games, and that's going to give him some potential in this one. And then we'll look at Taylor, also for Syracuse, who does have a little bit of tougher defensive matchup, but he's also played very well in his first two games this season, and he looks like he's rebounding well and also scoring fantasy and regular points and fantasy points at a pretty good clip. He's also hit several four threes so far this season, which gives him some utility. Now, Colgate's definitely a team that is kind of risky to look at too much, but they do have a couple players that have some potential, and if you think they can hang with Syracuse, then you can run with some of these guys as contrarian options. One being Braden Smith. His fantasy output in his first game was actually really solid. Even though it was a tight game, he definitely draws some potential here. Though, again, matchups are a thing, and Syracuse is going to be tough for this team. Uh, Records is a little bit pricey here and hard to roster as a result, but he's borderline a good play if you think they're going to hang with him. But one guy I do really think is interesting is Luigi. I don't know how to say your name. I'm sorry. But anyway, for Colgate, he has some interesting upside here because he's going to play full complement of minutes, and he's his minimum price basically, and he did pretty well in that first game, scoring 15 points. I don't expect him to get 15 points, but even if he gets 10 or so points at this price point, he can definitely pay off, so he's worth a look. That's pretty much what I have from that game. So then we're going to move into the the Marquette, Illinois game. Now this game is somewhat interesting as it does have a tight game. It's one of the tightest games at 1.5 point spread. Right now, we do have Illinois winning, even though Marquette is ranked higher. Part of the reason that they have a little bit of risk here is that Kolick, one of their guards, is questionable for this game. He got hurt in the last game, and so he does raise a concern there. However, Marquette does have two other players that we do like here, and they're actually kind of underpriced. One being Cam Jones at $6,900. He's played very well in his first two games, and I look for him to continue that in this one. Even though it's a tougher matchup, he should play pretty well here and has some upside in this game. And then Iguodaro for Marquette as well. Also an interesting option today. He's priced a little bit cheaper than I expected to be. He was kind of a good guy last year to use in certain situations, and I like him right now in this matchup. So I think he's somebody I would definitely consider rostering on the slate. And then if we switch to Illinois, we have just really one guy that I like quite a bit, and that's Shannon, who is priced up, but he has a lot of upside in this game. And if this game stays close, he's going to be a reason why I look for him to fill it up and try to score a lot of fantasy points in this one. These four early games, they have some utility here, so I like this slate so far. Then we're going to get into the Texas A&M SMU game here. Excuse me, I'm a little sniffly. Now, Marble for Texas A&M is questionable here, and he's yet to play. So if he does draw the start, though, he would definitely be interesting from a fantasy perspective, especially if it's like nice minimum price. But I really don't know what to think about him potentially playing in this game yet. So hopefully we get some information before this game plays. With that said, we're going to look at a couple players for Texas A&M and a couple players for SMU for this one. So Wade Taylor is going to be the top option from this team. He played pretty solid his first two games, and he's got some really good utility on this slate. At this price point, he's got some steals, he's getting some threes, He's getting a few assists and rebounds as well, and he's capable of scoring a lot of points. And I think he's going to have a really good game here. So I think he's a great option. Also going to look at Coleman, the forward here. Even if Julius Marble was to come back, he's going to get a full complement of minutes in this one. He played pretty tough in the game against Ohio State, and I look for him to have a similar type of game to that. Not so much in the scoring 20 points, but hopefully getting a double-double rebounds and maybe 10 points. And if he can do that, he'll definitely pay off at this price, so he's definitely a good option on the slate. Obviously, if Marble plays, he'd be somebody I would consider as well. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Then we're going to look at SMU, and this game's tight where there's a couple guys that should have some utility here. One being Ambrose Hilton, who's actually played pretty solid. His price is at around $4,500 right now, so obviously if he has the lowest point total game that he had so far this year at 15, that would not be ideal. But if he can get over 20 fantasy points, which I think he can, the only concern here is the minutes, where he probably won't get more than 20 or so minutes. But he's definitely capable here. He is a starter. And then we'll look at B.J. Edwards for SMU. Also, he's a little bit more pricey than Ambrose Hilton, but he does have some upside here. He's had a couple of decent games. Again, his ceiling is good, but his floor is, he's gonna have a tougher road here than Ambrose Hilton is. But I still think both those guys, who are both starters, are gonna have some potential in this matchup. So then we're going to move on to the Vanderbilt game versus UNCG. Excuse me here. Now, this game does carry some injury concerns. For Vanderbilt, Lawrence and Levin and also Dort have not even played yet, but they're all three are questionable, and they could play in this game. I'm going to operate as if they don't, simply because I don't think it's very likely that they play, but there is some potential possibility that they do. But that said, I will point this out here in just a minute. So for Vanderbilt first, we're going to look at Manjon. He is the overall best player on this team. He's also really fairly priced. He's been the best player on the team by a lot the first couple games, and they've struggled as a team, but part of that is not having a couple guys out that are going to get good minutes this season. But he's definitely a great option on this slate, and especially if Lawrence and Lupin are out, then he's definitely somebody I think is a near must play on the slate overall, and he looks like he's going to be a good option. Another guy I do like is Colin Smith. Now he started both games so far. He could lose minutes if Lawrence or Lupin or both are back, so do keep that in mind. But as long as those guys are on the not playing, then he's going to have some utility because he should be able to get a decent amount of minutes. He's got some rebounding upside here, and so he's definitely a capable value play. But where it gets really interesting is when we look at UNCG, and I think they're kind of a sneaky team today because of the way they're priced and because they have a tighter matchup against Vanderbilt than maybe some people will think. Right now, the spread on this game is 3.5 points in Vandy's favor. It is the lowest scoring game on the slate, so do keep that in mind. So you got to remember that. But they do have some value plays here that have some really good upside. We're going to start with Etel. Now, he's actually scored the most points for this team so far, and he's been getting a decent, in the first game, he got some good rebounds. Of course, that was an easier win for them, but I look for him to be a guy that tries to shoot the ball and be an efficient day. Obviously, he does carry some risk at this price, but he's definitely capable, and he is a starter. Then we're going to look at Brown Jones here for them. In his one game, he had an absolutely monster game and scored a lot of points. Now, he definitely has that potential here, as he's going to shoot a lot of balls. And if he can get some rebounds, which is definitely a possibility in this game, then he'll have some upside. But he definitely carries a little bit of risk, again, in the matchup. But my two favorite plays are Keyshawn Langley and Kobe Langley. Now, I'm going to look at Keyshawn Langley first, as he was much more involved in the offense last season than Kobe was. But I think both these guys are going to come in to be good options on this slate and then for this team. And they're both fairly priced right around $6,000. Obviously, I'm going to take Keyshawn over Kobe right now, but they both have a lot of utility, and they're both going to have some upside. Kobe does tend to pass the ball more, and Keyshawn is more of a combo guard, so do keep that in mind. But they definitely both have some potential on the slate. Obviously, using some guys from a team that isn't likely to isn't favored to win can be challenging, especially in a slower paced game. But those guys are just too cheap to ignore on the slate, so definitely in play. Excuse me. Then we're going to look at my game of the week, which is Kentucky versus Kansas. Now, I will preface to say this that I am a Kentucky fan, so I know Kentucky very well, and I'm going to operate looking at this as if we have a chance to win this game, which I honestly am not sure that we do because we don't have a center likely. Let's look at the injury report for this game. This is actually a pretty extensive report for Kentucky because they have a couple guys hurt and a few guys out. So for Kentucky, we're going to look at Bradshaw being out here. He's not going to play. Uh, Yenzo is not going to play. Thiero is questionable, but he is likely to play. And then Isovic is questionable. He's waiting to be cleared from the NCAA. So they're not going to have any centers, and unless Z is actually ruled eligible by the NCAA prior to this game, which is probably pretty unlikely. Thiero, according to Coach Cal, he is going to be playing in this game, so I'm pretty confident that he will play. That said, if we look at the price point for Kentucky, it's a little bit rough uh, on a couple of guys, but it's actually okay on a couple others. So, assuming that Kentucky can hang with Kansas in this game, which is going to be a tough thing considering the fact that Trey Mitchell is going to play center against Hunter Dickinson, which is really not fair. And what I mean by that is that Trey is more of a forward, and he's more of a swing forward, even not even a power forward really. But he's having to play center because we don't have another. All three of our seven fitters are out, so he's definitely in play on the slate if he can maintain. He's a pretty good shooting forward, and he has 3 point upside, and he has been playing well in the first two games. Now, obviously, those are easier games, but he's a guy that racks up like the random stats, which definitely gives him some potential in the slate, and especially at his price point. Antonio Reeves is the leading scorer for Kentucky. Is going to be all season long, and he has a lot of 3 point potential. He's hit the most threes of anybody on the slate with 7 in 2 games. I look for him to try to fill up the basket in this one. He's going to need to. He's going to have to hit a bunch of big shots to keep Kentucky in this, and hope and to give them a chance to win. And so if he has a big day, he's gonna be in a perfect lineup. Um, and that will help Kentucky win this game. If he doesn't have a big day, then he will definitely be annoying to roster, as he doesn't tend to get the peripheral stats very much, more of a scoring guard. So do keep that in mind here. Then we're going to look at two guys that are very high risk, high reward for Kentucky. One being Rob Dillingham. Now he's come out and played very well in his first 2 games. He bulked up after the Canada trip and really has played really tough as a tough player, just driving to the basket, trying to get fouled, not being too worried. And he just plays with a bit of a reckless abandonment. Even he's a little bit undersized, but he does rebound well for guard, and he's also getting some assists, which is helpful. And he's definitely capable of scoring points, though he doesn't take the best shots sometimes. He's definitely a guy that has some consideration here, and he's been popular in DFS in his first 2 games, and so he's definitely in play at this price point. But he does really carry some high risk, high reward. Then we're going to look at Reed Shepard. Now, he is going to come off the bench, probably one of either him or Dillingham likely will, or maybe even both. Just depends on how how Coach Cal decides to put Thiero back in. But I do think Shepard does have some potential, even though his minutes are going to be more limited than some of the others, simply because he's been playing so good defensively. He doesn't really get a lot of assists and rebounds, but he's capable of some good assists. And he can shoot threes, but he does need to get a couple blocks and steals to pay off here. But he's minimum price nearly, and he definitely has some potential from that perspective, though that is very high risk, high reward, very GPP oriented as totally here. Looking at Kansas, it gets a lot more simple here. We got 3 guys that we like a lot, and it's going to be hard to not roster Hunter Dickinson, considering the fact that Kentucky doesn't have a big guy to go up against him. In fact, in the first 2 games, he's barely played 20 plus minutes because of the blowouts. I don't expect a blowout here, but I expect him to absolutely dominate this game, and he's going to be hard to not roster from my perspective, even though I want him to lose the game. Looking at Jackson for Kansas as well, he stacks up really solid here, and he's had a pretty good game in the second game. The first game, he really just didn't play enough minutes, but he's going to get a lot of he's going to have an opportunity for assisting in this game. The guards for Kentucky could get in his space some, but he's going to have a lot of utility. And the way that the guards for Kansas play, going to take a lot of effort to slow them down at all. McCullers is also a great play on this slate, as he's been really good in the first 2 games, and he has a lot of upside in this matchup. and he's going to be locked in for potential assist, rebounds, and points. So he has a really good opportunity in this game. So that's what I have for this game. Hopefully it goes well for Kentucky, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. And then finally, these last two games, these are the two games that have the biggest spreads on it. This is the Iowa Creighton game first. And quite frankly, these last two games don't have a lot of great opportunities. But I really didn't, I really want to like Creighton, as I do like to roster these particular players last season, and Alexander Cockburner, Ashworth, and Sherman. But they're all very overpriced for this matchup, and this is a little bit of a uh, higher paced games, and so that's probably why they're priced up. But I just can't get myself to really like overpaying for these guys, considering the matchup and considering the fact that there's so many good value plays and quality plays throughout the slate. But looking at Iowa, if they aren't in a good spot here, really, but they do have a couple players that have some utility. One being McCaffrey for Iowa, who's played pretty solid his first two games. Again, the matchup's not perfect, but he's cheap enough that he's rosterable on the slate. And then another guy I like here is Sanford, who's obviously a little bit more expensive here, but he's played absolutely great basketball in the first two games, and he's managed to score a lot of points. Now, this is going to be a tougher game for this team, but they're going to play fast, and he's going to have to score real points to really pay off, and he definitely has some potential here. That's really what I have for that game. Obviously, Creighton is a team you could stack, but they just carry that risk because of their prices. Looking at USC and UCIR here, obviously we have some injuries here as well, with Kobe Johnson being questionable, and then uh, Iwu Chaku being questionable. He's a center for USC, and then LeBron's son is likely out still. We're not sure when he'll be back, but he is out right now, or doubtful at least at this point. So maybe he gets back soon. I do expect Iowa Chaka to potentially play in this one because he was really close to playing the last game. I'm not exactly sure what his role is going to be at this point, so we'll have to wait and see how that kind of plays out as well. But looking at USC, uh, really the greatest play here is Johnson if he does play. He played the first game of the year, but he sat out the second. If he gets back into this one, then he'll definitely have some potential for a big game. And he's got a great matchup in this game. It's got the best spread on the night, so he's definitely a capable option on the slate. Collier and Ellis, I do like them, but they do seem a little bit overpriced on this matchup. And then if we look at UCIR, we actually have one guy that I do kind of like a little bit here, and that is Andre Henry, who's just pretty cheap as a starter. He draws some potential here as he's he got some scoring and rebounding potential, and he's cheap enough that he's worth a look. Excuse me. And if you want to go super contrarian, then Justin Hahn would also be in play, but he's really just not worth the risk too much at this point. With that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. I really do like this slate. I hope it's a good one, and I hope your favorite teams win. Make sure to drop comments below and let me know what you think about the slate and who your favorite teams are and stuff like that. So have a nice day, guys.